political ambitions and to insert himself in an unconstitutional manner in the redistricting process. So this week's special legislative session was to draw a new congressional map, but in a shocking turn of events, you saw Republican leadership, both in the House and the Senate, state on the record that they were not going to draw a map, that the legislature would not put forward its own map, but instead they would wait for the governor to put forward his map. Unfortunately, as suspected, the governor put forth a map that diminishes Black representation in Congress by nearly 50%. And it's also a map that favors Republican candidates, and we believe would result in at least 3 additional Republican seats. So it is partisan gerrymandering at its worst. It is unconstitutional at its best. I should also mention that we are members of the Florida Legislative Black Caucus, all having currently served or previously served on the board of the Florida Legislative Black Caucus, with Senator Darrell Roussan serving as incoming vice chair, Representative Diane Hart serving on the board, and I'm the immediate past parliamentarian. So, and we just want to ask everyone if you would please mute yourselves while we're on just a bit of technical housekeeping that'll keep the live stream and everything running smoothly. So as I mentioned, this week we had a special session that was manipulated by the governor to support his national political ambitions. Republicans in the legislature abdicated their constitutional duty to draw a map, a congressional map that would pass a constitutional muster both under the Federal Voting Rights Act and the Florida Fair District Amendments, which were passed by a supermajority of Florida voters. By passing these unconstitutional maps, they knowingly are rigging districts to favor Republicans, and they are trying to erase opportunities for Black voters to elect representatives that will fight for all of us in Washington. By bulldozing himself into the redistricting process, the governor showed blatant disrespect to the voters of this state. And I know I have emphasized that it is diminishing Black representation in Congress by 50%. The reason why I do that is because federal law and state law requires us as a legislature to protect minority districts. And the governor's maps clearly don't do that. The governor said that he wanted a race neutral map, but instead what he has is a map that neutralizes the voices of Black voters. And unfortunately, the suppressing of the stories of those who belong in, or those who are members of marginalized communities has become far too common a theme in Tallahassee. This legislative session, we saw a 15-week abortion ban that provides no regard for the context of a woman's life and the decisions that she may have to make. There's no exception, even if a woman is pregnant due to rape, incest, or human trafficking. It's oppressing the stories of women and their families who may be faced with a difficult choice of whether or not to carry a pregnancy to term. We saw the suppressing of stories with respect to the Don't Say Gay bill, which is a direct attack on our LGBTQ plus youth and their families, and it's suppressing their stories as well. And then we also had House Bill 7, which is a direct attack on diversity. It is going to make it more difficult to teach African American history, Asian American history, Latin American history here in our classrooms in Florida. It also is telling companies and employers what they can do and what they cannot do in the way of diversity training and creating a new course of action. So suppressing the stories of marginalized people. And now we had this special session with redistricting, which did the same. Yesterday on the House floor, as we were approaching the close of debate, you saw some of our members initiate a protest and a sit-in to really call attention to just the blatant constitutional attack on Black voting rights. Unfortunately, we were not able to get Republican leadership to agree to any potential resolution or pathway forward whereby the legislature would actually honor its duty and draw a map. And so we thank you for joining us here today. I'll leave it there so that my colleague, Representative Hart, can share her thoughts on everything that happened this week. But I just wanted to make it clear that the map that was passed was unconstitutional. Governor DeSantis knew it was unconstitutional at the time that he introduced it. I believe that he is attempting to set up a challenge, a legal challenge to the Federal Voting Rights Act, and he won't be satisfied until that act is overturned. So what happened here in Florida yesterday has actual implications nationwide, because if Florida is successful, if Governor DeSantis is successful in this attempt, you'll start to see other governors controlled by Republicans start doing the same. So Representative Hart, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Representative Driscoll, Leader Driscoll. I fully believe everything that you've said was so true. Let me just start out by saying on Tuesday, I actually was asked to give opening prayer. God knows we needed that prayer. None of us knew how badly we needed it. But the one thing we understand here in Tallahassee is that we should stay on our knees praying all the time. For you to have a bill and it goes to one committee. You all know the process. It's our subcommittee, full committee. And if there's an appropriation piece to it, it goes to the appropriation committee. There's $1 million attached to this bill. So he knew very well that it would go into court. So it was making sure that he had the monies to fight. And these are taxpayer dollars we're using to continuously have these fights. But, you know, it was rather strange that just minutes before we gavelled in, we get notice that, hey, in addition to your congressional maps, which is the real reason we were here to begin with, we have 2 more bills we're going to give you to take a look at. So, you know, the governor, it appears that he believes that he has every right to draw a map, but no, that's a legislative duty. He could have gone back to the Senate map and use that map, or he could have allowed us as legislators to put forth a map, but he did not. And I found it very strange that both our Senate president and our speaker agreed that we're not even going to try and draw a map. We're just going to take whatever the governor gives us, and we're going to let that be the map. Unbeknown to me, I had no idea what his map would really look like, but I should have known that he would try and diminish Black voters' opportunity to vote for the people of their choice. And for you to go from 4 to 2 was just awful. And then you have 21 to 7. You're ensuring that Republicans make sure that they carry the stronghold this election cycle. So it was really very ugly that he would do that. But then what should we expect when you see somebody who will punish companies because they don't do what he wants them to do? Then we should expect anything. So yesterday in the House, as we were debating, and we got to the end of our debating on the congressional maps, and Representative Henson was speaking, and Rep. Grawl turned off, Speaker Grawl, she was at the time, turned off her microphone. She continued to speak. And several of our legislators went to the front and sat down because, you know, we know that there's no way that we can make that change the map situation. We knew that. But what we did know was we could bring awareness to what's happening right here in Florida. And many of you all might have realized yesterday they turned off the cameras, they turned off the Wi-Fi. That was in hope of being able to ensure that people outside would not know what was happening. But there's good old Facebook, right? And because of that, we were able to ensure that people knew and could see what was happening in our chambers. But you know, I have to remind people that I'm not a young girl. I'm 60, soon be 67. I was 10 years old when we were still walking through the back doors of businesses where I was going to a colored water fountain. But it appears that when you begin to tell them your life experience, your lived experiences, they don't want to hear it. They'll immediately say, oh, that has no bearing on the bill when you talk about what's happening to Black people and how you're trying to diminish our votes. But if we say something about the governor, then we're told that that's outside of the scope of this bill. But if they talk about the governor, it's okay. So, you know, yesterday was an opportunity for us to ensure that people really got the gist of what this redistricting is about. So many people don't understand, and they're not paying close enough attention. But I do believe that after yesterday, people will be paying very close attention. And we talked about the bill that he signed. Is it scheduled to be signed at 1:30, 2 o'clock, Representative? Then critical race theory is not taught in schools. It's taught in college level. But you don't want us to talk about history. And I keep reminding people, if we don't talk about your history, you're bound to repeat it. We never want to see what this country has gone through repeated. So I was very happy to be in the chambers yesterday. I was happy to participate because I know what it feels like to have your voice diminished and not have opportunities like so many other people have. So I just say I'm looking forward to us ensuring that voters turn out. They've got to. This is our turn to show the governor what he's doing is not permissible by any of our standards, and we're just not going to stand for it.
That's right. Thank you, Rep. Hart. And I think, I really appreciate you centering this on history and talking about what oppressed people, and particularly the Black community, has been through in this country, because we know that this sort of peaceful protest was critical during the civil rights movement to call attention to injustice. We know that people like luminaries like the late John Lewis, Congressman Lewis, would get into quote unquote good trouble to really challenge these laws when they were unjust. And I think what we saw on the House floor yesterday were members whose voices just hadn't been heard, and who decided to use civil disobedience in a very peaceful way to sit down, as they tried to stand up for every Floridian to just have to sit down and to really try to get their colleagues to listen. And thank you for mentioning that. We opened the legislative session, as we do every time, with prayer. But I think what a lot of people could not see when the cameras were cut off yesterday, while there was the sit-in going on, is that there was also prayer. That all of the Democratic members, white, Black, Hispanic, it didn't matter, gathered and held hands in the middle of the chamber and prayed for the wisdom of our legislative leaders, for our own wisdom and guidance, for the people of this great state of Florida, and to really show us a pathway forward to help protect our democracy. I think we're living at a time where, unfortunately, people lean so hard into their political identities that we forget to recognize the common humanity in people. And yes, there is a Republican governor at the helm today, but this would be just as wrong as if it were a Democratic governor. There are certain fundamental principles in our democracy that we should all care about. And one of those bedrock principles is separation of powers. The judiciary has its job, the legislature has its job, and the executive has its job. And the job of the executive is to execute the laws, not to make the laws. And so when you see the sort of gross overreach, like what we're seeing from Governor DeSantis, it should have the alarm bells sounding for all of us, because it creates such a dangerous precedent. Our democracy is a privilege. It's a privilege to live in this country with the democracy that we have. And it's a privilege to live in the great state of Florida. And we all need to do our part to hold elected officials accountable, including Governor DeSantis. It has to start at the top to make sure that we are abiding by our federal constitutional principles as well as our state constitutional principles. I see that Senator Darrell Roussan has joined us. Senator Roussan, if you would just like to share your thoughts about what happened with special session this week and why it is so dangerous that this congressional map has passed that is diminishing Black representation in Congress for the state of Florida.
Thank you very much, Representative Driscoll, Madam Leader. Thank you for calling this press conference on this very, very, very important and critical issue impacting citizens of the state of Florida. The effect of the policy of Senate Bill 2C is that it cracks the Black community of North Florida. We know this is retrogression. The Black communities in North Florida and Orlando will lose their ability to elect representatives of their choice. Just do the math. How do I come back home and tell my people that this does not reduce opportunity? Do the math. We have 4 Black congressmen right now in DC, and it will be reduced to 2. That's retrogression. This point was made multiple times by legislators, Senate and House members. The point made by the governor's chief of staff, Mr. Kelly, that there's tension between the Federal Voting Rights Act and Fair Districts portion of our state constitution, I suggested that legal tension is not a justification for erasing Black representation. We fought too hard for protections, and those protections are being peeled back. Any way you analyze this map, it results in the loss of half of the Black representation. And that, to me, clearly violates the Fair Districts provision of our state constitution. And that's really all I want to say right now. I'm sorry I missed the first part of this. I was traveling to get here, but I would support what my colleagues have indicated.
Thank you so much, Senator Rouson. And I think that provides a good overview of what happened this week and what are the legal challenges and issues that we have with the map that was passed, the blatantly unconstitutional map that was passed in this congressional redistricting process, which frankly felt like a farce, I think, to many of us, because the legislature abandoned its duties to draw the map. I think we will open it up to questions at this time. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and we will recognize you, or you can also just take yourself off mute. That works just fine as well. Any questions? You could also feel free to type them in the chat. I know Zoom format's not always the easiest for press conferences, but if anyone has any questions at this time, feel free to take yourself off mute or to write your question in the chat. And while folks are doing that, I think I wanted to add just one additional thought, and Rep. Harder, Senator Rouson, if you'd like to chime in, but what happened with this congressional map also impacts Tampa Bay. And so in Tampa Bay now, we have, under this map, we'll have Congressional District 15 and 14. And what we see is that they are splitting that congressional district, I believe it's 14, splitting it across the Bay and not providing any real justification for that. We also see that there was packing of Democratic voters that occurred in the area surrounding those new districts, newly drawn districts, such that it is causing Congressional District, I want to say 15, to lean Republican, whereas it previously did not do. So what occurred this week in the legislature also has implications for Tampa Bay, and the people of Tampa Bay are now going to have to deal with the governor's bad actions.
Yes, I agree with you, Rep. That is exactly what transpired. And I mean, he set this up. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. And that was the reason he vetoed our maps. I'm sure when Senator Rouson and those put together the maps, they took a look at everything that's required in our tier 1. And, you know, it was so ironic that when we got here and we talked about these maps and the congressional maps, everything was tier 1, tier 1, tier 1. Well, when we came back to special session, you barely heard the word tier 1 at all. And it was no longer necessary to use tier 1 criteria to create these maps. It then became tier 2. And they said things like, well, you know, we didn't do the whole map. We just did part of the map. However, the part of the map that they did, they really ruined the map. And they knew that. But that's the reason they put the money in place, to ensure that there will be dollars for litigation, because they know that this map is unconstitutional. There's no question about it.
Thank you, Rep. Hart. I think the last order of business, just wanted to ask my colleagues if they wanted to comment at all on House Bill 7, which is the bill that will create a new cause of action if history is taught in schools in such a way that it makes people feel uncomfortable, and if diversity training is given in such a way that it will make employees feel uncomfortable. Would either of you like to comment on the impending signing of House Bill 7?
I would just like to say that it's a very sad day when we don't want history to be taught as it occurred. That's a sad time that you want to make sure that you don't make people feel uncomfortable. However, right here in this legislature, every single day on this House floor, there are things said and in committees that make me feel uncomfortable, but nobody seems to care about that. They're trying to ensure that we don't teach true history. I keep saying it, if we don't face our history, we're bound to repeat it. We must face history. We must. You know, I'm sorry if it makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but it's the truth. So why don't we want the truth told? There's nothing wrong.
The thing that galls me about the signing of this bill into law is that it disrespects the professional teacher. What professional teacher goes to work every day purposing to make kids feel uncomfortable, to make them feel disrespected, to blame them for the sins of their fathers? These teachers get into the classroom because they want to stimulate, motivate, and encourage children to learn, to think critically. And that's what the job of a teacher is. And more we're encroaching upon teaching and trying to prohibit and tell them what's best for these children.
Thank you for that, Rep. Hart and Senator Rouson, very well said. And, you know, my thing with HB 7 is what we've said all along. The accurate teaching of history actually allows our young people to be a part of this democracy in a significant way. Yes, I know when we think about our history, there are challenging moments in it, but you think about the Japanese internment camps, for example. I want kids to learn about that, especially in a time where we are seeing an increase in hate crimes and violent attacks on Asian Americans in our communities. I want our young people to know about that so that they can look at what's happening present day and try to make connections between the two, but also to be a part of the story of making different choices so that we don't repeat those same mistakes. No, America is not a perfect union, but if we deny the opportunity for our young people to learn about history in an accurate way, we deny them the opportunity to participate in the active forming of that more perfect union. And that is the duty of all of us as citizens. Well, our time is drawing to a close. I know we were going to wrap at 2. We thank all of you for joining. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out directly to any of us or to our staff. You can also reach out to the executive director of the Florida Legislative Black Caucus, Asidrum Lamar, or the communications director for the Florida House Democrats, and that would be Jackson Peel. Thank you so much.